Former friendly hello, welcome to lovely Las Vegas for Coast to Coast Hoops with myself, Greg Hoops Peterson, now part of the VSiN Family Podcast. We've got an excellent podcast for you. We're going to be joined in segment number 2 by a good friend of ours, Tristan Freeman, who's doing such great work over at Boston Brackets, looking at this great game that we all know and love of college basketball. The NBA draft decisions have now been made. We're going to get his thoughts on what we all saw over the last few days, any surprises that really stood out to him, what teams were perhaps a little bit of winners and losers, and the Milan Memiselovic race, because a lot of teams are going to be looking at him, especially Tounde Yessoufou signing with St. John's. That was something that happened very late. This happened after I had already recorded the podcast. I'll give you my thoughts there for St. John's, for Tounde, and so much more here in the first segment. Then in the final segment, saw a few pieces of college basketball transfer news on Thursday. We'll round those up. If you've got a question, comment, segment idea, what have you for this podcast, you have one or two ways to be able to fire those in. First one is my Twitter/X timeline at GNet_81. Keep in mind, letters CM, they mean does not matter. So as per usual, please do send these into the timeline. And the other way is find an Apple Podcast review. If you rate this podcast 5 stars, it's very much appreciated. From there, you're able to fire in whatever you'd like to hear on this podcast via that 5-star review. And I do beg with you, I do plead with you, please do send in these Twitter/X questions. But we did see very, very late on Wednesday, big piece of news with St. John's being able to bring in Tounde Yessoufou. In my opinion, this was a big game changer for them. They return a few guys from last year, most notably Ian Jackson, so they've got a little bit of that from a year ago, but it was very clear that they needed a little bit of, shall we say, a dominant player, because you do lose so many players from a season ago. Obviously, no longer having Zuby Ejiofor was the heart and soul of that team. That hurts them as well. They are bringing in Babacar Sane, who a lot of people think is going to be an amazing player, and they did sign Donnie Freeman as well, so they've got some well-rounded players, but banking on someone like an Avery Brown, probably not a place where you want to be. Quinn Ellis, he should be a solid freshman, but you never know what you're going to get out of some of these freshmen, especially with Slick Rick Pitino saying that he's not really in the business of bringing in a lot of freshmen. With Yessoufou, he was a guy that I thought was going to be as good as gone. A lot of people had him projected as a lottery pick coming into the season. A little bit of a disappointing season this last year for Baylor as a whole, and for Yessoufou, he's going to need to work on that three-point shot. For Yessoufou, that was really the biggest weakness for him, because he was able to do a nice job in terms of being a statue sufferer over at Baylor. He was averaging for the team 18 points. He was able to give them about 6 boards, but he only shot about 29.5% from three-point range. Threw in there multiple steals as well. It feels like he's going to be able to fit this St. John system very well. 6'5", a little bit of a do-it-all guy. If you can give them a little bit more three-point shooting, that'll be huge. But as we know, St. John's over the last few years, they haven't necessarily been a team that has relied upon three-point shooting. That's a big reason why a lot of people think that Milan Memiselovic might be a guy that's going to be adding on over there as well. So we shall see on that front. And certainly I'll be talking about the Milan sweepstakes here in the next few days. The schools out there in the great state of Kentucky, in Louisville, and the Wildcats certainly going to have some interest there. But I did like this one for Tounde. And then there was one other piece of news that came and went that I did not report upon because I forgot that this guy was in the NBA draft. Very strange to see the fact that Bryson Tucker was over at Washington last year. He averaged 5.7 points per game. He decided that he was going to stay in the NBA draft. I think his odds of getting drafted in the NBA draft are about the odds of mine. That was one that flew under the radar. I apologize. I did not think that he was going to be making any sort of an impact for anyone, but now we don't have to worry about that. Also, the fact that Jeremy Fears, he's going to be back at Michigan State as well. That's not one that I rounded up yesterday. I figured that was going to be a done deal. Fears had a nice season over at Michigan State. Probably can use a little bit of work with regards to that jump shot. I didn't feel like he graded out the greatest at the NBA draft combine. He's back for Michigan State. Foregone conclusion, in my opinion, but still good news for them. And it's always good news when we've got our guy, Tristan Freeman from Boston Brackets, joining me. And we're going to chat with him right here on the flip side, right here on Coast to Coast Hoops with myself, Greg Hoops Peterson, now a part of the VSiN Family Podcast. Side edge this college basketball season? Well, VSiN experts use CBB Analytics, the most comprehensive college basketball analytics platform in the world. See injury impact, on and off data, clutch time performance metrics, first versus second half splits, and so much more. Utilize the promo code of VSiN, that is VSIN, to get $30 off and find your betting edge over at cbbanalytics.com. That is cbbanalytics, all one word, .com. For anyone that is new new to VSiN, well, I wish you a friendly hello. This is an attention to anyone that is new to VSiN because you're able to get some free stuff with our daily newsletter. It's a great way to catch up on everything that's happening in the sports betting world. It's delivered straight to your inbox every single morning. VSiN's newsletter offers picks, data, strategies for the day's betting menu, and so much more. Sign up for free today over at VSiN.com/newsletter. That's VSIN.com/newsletter, and start receiving your free newsletter tomorrow morning. That is VSIN.com/newsletter. Stay ahead of the game and bet smarter with VSiN. And we're back here in lovely Las Vegas for Discuss Hoops with myself, Greg Hoops Peterson, now part of the VSiN Family Podcast. Always great to be joined by this man, as we've got Tristan Freeman aboard. He does such great work over at Bustin' Brackets, taking a look at this great game that we all know and love of college basketball. I know that he's dialed in with a little bit of everything there. Additionally, I know that he's doing such great work with our friends over at Sleepers Media. He does some work over at the Field of 68 and so much more. You're able to follow him on the old Twitter /X at HoopsOn351 all together. And Tristan, it's always a pleasure, my friend. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for having me, Greg. Appreciate it.
I appreciate you, Tristan. And Tristan, we are coming off of what was some very fun and exciting NBA draft decisions. And were there any real surprises that stood out to you for them? Because I feel like a lot of these guys that were on the fringe, they returned back to school, maybe was a little bit surprised by Allen Graves, but I thought it was very interesting what we saw here over the last week or so.
I think most of them went as expected. I think Malik Thomas elected not to come back to Arkansas was interesting because he's not a guaranteed first-round pick. But, Jordan Smith coming in, and you also had Jeremiah Wilkinson, who led Georgia in scoring. His role, honestly, could have been even less next year. So this might have been the time to strike while the iron was hot. And, that was an interesting one. And Koa Pete, obviously everyone knows that, he hasn't shown that he can shoot the basketball, but he's also, an elite athlete, and he can develop into a shooter. And I think there was a case that he could have came back, but I also understand that maybe he wasn't going to get, the largest role either in Arizona, considering they bring back other front court players and that 5-star Caleb Holt joined the team. So while those may have been surprising in terms of, hey, you could have came back, maybe you left something on the table, I also don't think that there was any shocking decisions from the key guys.
Yep, I'm right there with you. And what I thought was the most interesting one was Tounde Yessoufou coming back to school, because I did think that he was going to be as good as gone, because we were thinking that way for very much a large portion of the process. And then it comes out very late on Wednesday that he's also signing with St. John's. How did you take a look at that development? Because I felt like Yessoufou towards the end, he was a little bit closer to 50-50. I wasn't necessarily sure if it was going to be St. John's that was going to sign him, though.
Yeah, after missing out on Masamba Diop, I didn't know what else, St. John's was going to be able to do. And, there was talk about this would be in the Milan Masilovic race, but considering that you already had Donnie Freeman, I wasn't sure if that was going to be the best fit. Tounde, however, who is a true wing, is a good fit. He's obviously a guy that can get buckets. He can give you 20 points in any game. And this was the St. John's team who lacked some proven offense. Obviously people are high on Quinn Ellis coming from overseas to run the offense. Ian Jackson was back, and Donnie Freeman, can give you 16 and 8. But now you have a guy in Yessoufou who can be the go-to player on the team. I think shooting, considering he shot under 30% from deep, is a concern. This might be a team who, once again, still is an elite shooting team, but you have an all-league player, and when you get one of those at the very end of May,
Yep, I'm right there with you. And it's been an intriguing offseason for the Big East in general, as we do have our good friend Tristan Freeman, does such great work over at Bustin' Brackets. Joining me on Coast to Coast Hoops. And just how have you looked at this offseason as a whole for the Big East? Because I really think that they made some good moves. The bottom of the conference looks so much better, because even a team like DePaul decided that they were going to go out there and spend. We saw Georgetown a few days ago. They brought in, I believe it was Victorious Miller, to be able to help them out a little bit. It feels like the Big East, because they're a basketball-only school, they're saying we are going to go all in after, let's call it what it is. It felt like it was a little bit of a top-heavy conference last year. Still might be this year with UConn and company, but it feels like the bottom of the conference has really addressed things, and the top guns, well, they continue to spend, and they continue to be top teams.
Yeah, I thought, the top three from last year all did fine, especially with St. John's getting Yessoufou. Xavier did really well because last year, Xavier had all mid-major guys, and that the results show from that. But they got a lot of high major proven guys like True Washington and Nike Nwoko to anchor it inside him. Marquette finally went into the transfer portal and got key guys. And then look, even Georgetown, who I'm not high on overall, they ended up getting Victorious Miller, who was a double-digit scorer at OK State. So again, you get that late March, it's hard to be upset. Providence, obviously, with their complete rebuild. I think for a conference that was really down last year, because really only had three competitive teams overall, it's been pretty good collectively. And you hope with the expanded tournament that they can get back to 6, 7 bids, because that's what you have to do in a conference that's still looking for respect, and you not want to fall too far behind the Big 12, Big 10, and SEC.
Yep, and especially with the expanded NCAA tournament as well, you got to be able to strike while the iron is hot, and I feel like they've been able to do a great job of that, and I'm so glad that you brought up the SEC, because I did feel like they had the most amount of decisions in terms of the NBA draft, and there might be still one out there on the board in Milan Misalovic, because he's in the transfer portal. With him coming back to school, you have to figure that there are some strong offers that are coming in for Milan, to say the least. So maybe Kentucky, someone else in the conference might be that. I know that there's rumors of Louisville as well, but how would you say things went as a whole for the conference? Because I felt like it was a little bit of a mixed bag for Arkansas, but really felt like Vanderbilt needed back Tanner Thomas. They were able to get him, and Amari Allen coming back for Alabama. I thought that was very good news on that front as well.
Yeah, you also got, Jukis, leaving the draft earlier and picking Tennessee over North Carolina and Michigan. That was huge for them. Teams like Texas, Mississippi State bringing back their best players. Obviously, Florida brought back all the guys that they could. Oklahoma bringing back Xavier Brown. These are things that gives you a nice floor overall. And obviously, we're not going to expect them to get 14 bids to the tournament. But around 8 to 10, should be a goal, assuming programs like Ole Miss and Auburn take a step up. We'll see what happens. We don't know who's going to play for LSU until probably November 2nd when the season starts based on all their eligibility stuff. But overall, again, we'll see if Kentucky gets Momcilovic, but if that happens, again, there should be around 10 teams with legit postseason expectations, because overall, outside of Malik Thomas, I think all the draft decisions went in the SEC's favor overall.
Yep, I'm right there with you, and I'm so glad that you brought up LSU as well, because I've been talking about them on this podcast for the last week and a half or so. What do you just make on the entire situation? Because we have guys on the roster, but I still can't remember ever being this late into the offseason and thinking I have absolutely no idea what we're going to get, because over half the guys on the roster right now need special waivers to be able to play. They're certainly rolling the dice, bringing over guys from the G League, and it's very, very much a up-in-the-air situation where you have to figure that the NCAA is going to be responding in the month of June to what LSU has done.
Yeah, RJ Louise is a conference player of the year, and you have no idea if he's going to be there because he's set up to be your lead guard. If not him, then who? Austin Nunez from Texas San Antonio. That's not going to work. Devine Igachukwu is a role player. He's not a lead guard. So they don't really have any other options to get guards. And I think it was Madar from Israel, like you mentioned, he's going to need a waiver of sorts. And besides that, I know people are high on, the international guys like, Bryce DeSerd and Salu Niang, but SEC basketball is probably a top 3 to 5, league in and of itself. So these guys coming over is not a guarantee by any measure that they're going to dominate and they're going to play overly well. Louise is one of the only proven products, and Diabate obviously is a Kentucky transfer. Everyone else could just be average. And if that's the case, they're going to be a bottom 4 team in the league next year if Louise can't get the waiver.
Yeah, and I was about to say, too, with James Nanji, we saw how that went last year. He was the number 131 overall pick in the draft, and he was a part of the Karl Anthony Towns trade. So, yeah, that's a big giant
ball. And still a free agent.
Yeah, nobody wants to touch him right yet. That is absolutely wild. And you have to figure that some low major team is probably going to try to take a swing on him. I don't know if he's going to accept any of those offers, but yeah, that completely blew up in the face of Baylor. And I feel like they learned their lesson after that. So lots to take a look at there as Tristan Freeman, who does amazing work over at Bustin' Brackets. He's joining me right here on Coast to Coast Hoops. And now with the NBA draft decisions in the books, it feels like the biggest domino to fall right now is Milan, who we were talking about a little bit earlier. I mentioned it. Have to figure that he's going to get a lot of money for coming back to school. I don't think that there's any question about that. But how do you take a look at things since you're out there in the city of Pittsburgh, so you do a great job on the ACC front? I know that there are a lot of rumors for him going to Louisville. There's obviously a lot of rumors going to Kentucky, and when it comes to this time of year, you never know who's going to step up with a big giant bag of money. But how do you take a look at this? Because he's one of the most impactful players, in my opinion, that returned to school this year, and it's very rare that you see a player of his caliber out there on the open market here in very late May.
I mean, he led the country in 3-point shooting, makes and percentage. So, like,
At 6'8".
Yeah, and he's the best player you can possibly ask for at this stage in the game because all teams can use shooting. And assuming the three teams in the mix, can use them, all of them can use them for different reasons. Arizona is a team who was literally the worst high major, not the worst, but they shot the fewest threes among high major teams. And now that you don't have, two likely first round picks on your roster and player of the year in Big 12 player of the year in Jaden Bradley, you're going to need to be able to space the floor. And then, Louisville is a team who, if you can bring a stretch forward to play next to Flory Badunga, that's only going to, make the offense even better when you have that kind of spacing. And then he might be the best player on Kentucky's roster next year, even with Malachi Moreno coming back. And, you bring in Alex Wilkins from Furman, and then you also have Diallo from Washington. Like, Monsilovich could be the best player for Kentucky. So I think, signs lead to Kentucky possibly being a favorite, but they're going to have to find a way to win out. Otherwise, you're going to see even more complaints from Big Blue Nation after what's been a pretty rough offseason overall.
Yeah, with Kentucky, they've done a great job in terms of collecting role players. They really don't have that main guy. Good news for them was that they were able to get Malachi Moreno back, as well as he was another one that was testing out the NBA draft water. So that's going to be able to help them out quite a bit, but still have a lot of question marks there with Kentucky. And I know that the NBA draft decisions over the last few weeks have captured everyone's attention, but as we know, the transfer portal, it still rolls on. And Tristan, I want to just keep this one open-ended. Who's a team or two that you feel like made some great moves here in the month of May that maybe we're not talking about and got lost with these big NBA draft decisions and the LSU hoopla?
I guess I'd go back to Georgetown, who was one of the later teams when it comes to their roster pickups. Obviously, you mentioned Victorious Miller from OK State. They also got Jalen Lowe coming back from Kentucky, who should be due for, I guess, what would be considered a breakout campaign of his own. And then, I'm very interested in Josiah Parker, who was a later pickup, who averaged, I think, 15 a game at Florida Atlantic as a freshman. He is 6'7" wing. He's going to get a ton of minutes. And I think he could be one of those, freshman transfers that moves up that translates very well. And they're going to need him to if they're going to be a competitive team. Because right now, even after Landon Miller, there's still some concerns about them, especially in the front court after losing Halafuna.
Yep, I think that is well said by you. And for Georgetown, they need to be keeping up with so many moves that are happening in the Big East. We mentioned it with Providence. They've had an amazing offseason. I'm glad that you pointed out Xavier. They've done a great job as well. So you just go down the list. And for Georgetown, took them a little bit of time, but bringing in Miller a few days ago, I think is going to be big for them. So well said by you. And Tristan, I know you're doing an amazing job looking at this great game of college basketball. Finally, we're starting to get a little bit more clarity with the NBA draft decisions in the books. I know you're doing a great job getting set for the upcoming season, looking at all that we are getting right now and so much more. So let the good people at home know it's all on tap for you and how people can follow along on social media and other platforms.
Yeah, you can follow me at Hoopsnut351 on Twitter/X. You can also follow my work at Fanscience Bustin' Brackets, Hoops HQ, and then the Field of 60 Daily every Friday morning.
Absolutely. And Tristan, he's doing such great work looking at this amazing sport of college basketball, and every single time he joins me on such great insight. So big thanks to Tristan for joining me on Coast to Coast Hoops, now part of the VSiN Family Podcast. Coming next, it is that time of the podcast. I give you a recap of the news and notes that we saw in college basketball on Thursday. Las Vegas for Coast to Coast Hoops with myself, Greg Hoops Peterson, now part of the VSiN Family Podcast. Always great to be joined by Tristan Freeman. He's doing such amazing work over at Bustin' Brackets, looking at this amazing game of college basketball every single time he joins me on such great insights. Did so once again today. So a big thanks to Tristan for joining me in the last segment. Now it is that time of the podcast to give you a recap of the news and notes that we saw in college basketball over the last 24 hours. Starting to get a little bit thinner with these news and notes, but that said, we saw an international man of mystery commit to Murray State. Hopefully I get the same correct. Borak Kakic, hopefully I got that correct. He comes over from Serbia, 20-year-old who is averaging in the Adriatic League 15.5 points, 5 boards, shot about 34.5% from three-point range as a 6'8", little bit of a combo player. Jonathan Gavoni, by the way, did a good job breaking that down because I can't say that I was overly familiar with his work, truth be told, but should be a nice pickup for a Murray State team that obviously they're not going to be the same team that they were a season ago. Losing Frederick King down low is rough, but they did bring back Roman Doman from a year ago. I like the fact that they bring in Christian Jones as well, Sean Tapula. This should be a team that has a lot of size. They were really doing a nice job in terms of pushing teams to the inside last season as well. That should be still a nice strength for them. Felt like they needed a little bit more three-point shooting. This should be able to give them a little bit more versatility. I don't know if Murray State quite climbs to the top of the Missouri Valley Conference or anything like that, but I feel like this does a good job in terms of fortifying that roster, and I think that he's going to be able to come in right away and be a nice difference maker for them. Chuck Love III, he was over at Loyola Chicago last season. He was limited at 13 games due to injury, and before he got injured, he was looking decent. I'm not going to say he was great, but he was averaging about 7.5 points per contest. He has decided that he is going to be heading on over to Austin Peay, and Austin Peay out there in the Ohio Valley Conference last few seasons has been one of the best teams out there. I really feel like this Coach Gibson system is great. Now, the big thing for Chuck Love is he was a part of a Loyola Chicago team that generated absolutely no turnovers whatsoever last year, and Austin Peay, that bread and butter of the defense, is being one of the best mid-major teams in all of college basketball in terms of generating turnovers. But that said, I do think that also bringing in Jamari Hughey, 6'6", a little bit of a combo player from Marshall, is going to be helping out. And for Austin Peay, they really haven't brought in a lot of Division I transfers here in the offseason. They've been looking a little bit more at the non-Division I route here. And for Austin Peay, they do retain a few guys from a season ago as well. You don't find that with a lot of teams, but Rashad Marshall should be back, Zaire Collins as well. Those were two of their top 5 guys from a year ago. They're bringing in a lot of freshmen, so I feel like Austin Peay still needs to bring in a little bit more. They're going to need to feel a little bit more secure, but this is a solid ad for them, bringing in a guy that was able to make a little bit of an impact from Loyola Chicago. Even though you might not be the world's greatest fit with the system, they need to get something on the board, and they did. Isaiah Coleman, pretty rock-solid player over at Oklahoma State last season. He was averaging about 6.5 points, 4 boards per contest. When he was over at Seton Hall, he was really a dominator for that team. He just didn't necessarily find his bearings over at Oklahoma State because 2 seasons ago when he was over at Seton Hall, he was averaging more in that neighborhood, about 15.5 points, 5 boards. Been a career 27% three-point shooter. That's a little bit rough, but meep, the UTSA Roadrunners get up on the board, and it was a rough season last year for UTSA. And for UTSA, very early on, this was looking like a very rough offseason for them. And I still think that UTSA is going to be taking it on the chin a little bit because with Austin Clonch, his system is based around being able to generate turnovers. For the most part, they haven't brought in a lot of guys that I think are going to be able to fit the system. This is going to be a fit with that system, but they also got Isaiah Watts on the board. He was a double-figure scorer 2 seasons ago over at Washington State. Preston Turner down for what? Coming over from Eastern Illinois. Should be able to fit that system. Ashton Smith, he should be able to give you some production as they're bringing in a few guys from South Dakota. Also Shea Ebowin, who is a 6'5", little bit of a combo player. J.J. Kelly comes over from Ohio. Joshua Legree over at Morehead State. They've got a lot more depth than they did a season ago. Do I think that they're going to be able to ascend in the top part of the American? No, and they're still going to be rough on the glass. That said, bringing in a guy like a Coleman, that's a really good ad for them. And over the last few weeks, bringing in he and Watts, that finally gives them go-to scores. So that is big for them. And then Loyola Maryland had Jonas Saratudis do a solid job for them when he was out there on the floor last year. He was limited to 19 games, but 6.5 points, 1.8 blocks per contest when he was out there. Georgia State strikes again. Coach Kremens doing a really good job in terms of adding guys. And I feel like it was either yesterday or 2 days ago, Georgia State had made another signing, and I kept saying, hey, if Georgia State can sign a big man that's able to give you some blocks, some rebounds down low, they might actually be in halfway decent shape. Well, this is the answer for them because they're already bringing in Jaden Jackson, a double-figure scorer from South Dakota State. Jacob Meyer was a nice facilitator over at Coastal Carolina, UAB, DePaul. Eric Parnell, a double-figure scorer from Fairleigh Dickinson. They've done a great job with the guards. AJ Smith is a guy that comes over from Temple. He was injured last season, but he's got a lot of upside as a 6'5", little bit of a joker player as well. Now you sign a 6'10" big man that's able to give you some shot blocking. It pairs very well with this overall system. They're going to have some good three-point shooting. I don't know if it's great, but I think that it's going to be good. Terrence Dixon Jr., 6'8", little bit of a do-it-all guy from Southern as well. Good to be able to go in there, help them out. I really like what Georgia State is doing, and out there in the Sun Belt, I think that they're going to be a force, and hopefully this podcast can be a force for helping you guys win some bets for this upcoming season. I'm looking every single day at the news and notes that we're seeing in college basketball here in the offseason, and as we are getting more solidified with regards to these rosters, within the next few weeks, I'm going to be starting up my conference preview podcast. I'm going to give you one for every single conference, and if you do like hearing from this fine podcast, Coast to Coast Hoops, you're able to subscribe wherever your podcast, Apple Podcasts, Google Play, Spotify, Stitcher, and TuneIn. If you have a question, comment, segment idea, what have you for this podcast, you have one of two ways we offer those in. First one is my Twitter/X timeline at @GNet_81. Keep in mind, large CM, they mean does not matter, so as per usual, please do send these into the timeline. And the other way, that is find an Apple Podcast review. If you rate this podcast 5 stars, it's very much appreciated. From there, you're able to fire in whatever you'd like to hear on this podcast via that 5-star review. I'm with you guys every single day on this podcast here in the offseason and the regular season once we get back into it. Picks and analysis on every single game, every single day. And also a big thanks to Tristan Freeman of Boston Brackets for joining me in segment number 2. We're going to keep the great guests going all offseason long, and we're going to keep this podcast going all offseason long. So appreciate you tuning in today. I'll be back with you once again tomorrow. Thank you.